各位朋友，大家好，欢迎来到天才儿童培养频道，我是郭万传教授。小孩子的成功就是我们整个家庭的成功。今天我要跟大家介绍 Alphakids Level 24。
When the Bus Was Late, written by Matilda Gow, illustrated by Chantal Stewart. This book is about a boy called Jackson who turns out to be very helpful to everyone catching the bus. Open the book and read the title. When the Bus Was Late, written by Matilda Gow, illustrated by Chantal Stewart. Now I'm going to read the book, and you can follow the words with your eyes. Look at the pictures as well. Mrs. Watson arrived at the bus stop. It was cold. It was raining on her red handbag. Where was the bus? Mr. Parkinson arrived at the bus stop. He was right on time. He was always right on time. It was raining on his shiny briefcase. Where was the bus?
看这个插画画得非常好。
Jackson skidded up to the bus stop. He was puffing and panting. His socks had fallen down. His knees were splashed with mud. Big drops of rain fell down his neck.
The bus isn't here yet?
He yelled.
Fantastic! Must be my lucky day.
Are you always so late?
Asked Mr. Parkinson.
How do you ever expect to get anywhere if you can't be ready on time?
Quite so, said Mrs. Watson. Just then, the bus pulled up. Well, said Mrs. Watson to the driver as she paid for her ticket, you are very late indeed. It is terribly inconvenient. Mr. Parkinson shook the rain off his shiny briefcase as the driver gave him a ticket.
You are very late,
he said to the driver.
It is terribly inconvenient.
Hi,
said Jackson to the driver.
It's lucky you were late this morning. I just made it in time. Phew!
Jackson rummaged through his pockets. In one pocket, he found half of an old bus ticket, a magnet, an old piece of chewing gum, and a lollipop. In the other pocket, he found a bit of blue fluff. In his back pocket, he found a sock with red stripes.
I've been looking for that,
said Jackson. Mrs. Watson tapped her foot impatiently. Are you always in such a muddle? She asked. How do you ever expect to get anywhere if you never come prepared?
Quite so,
said Mr. Parkinson. But the bus driver winked at Jackson and said,
Take your time, son.
Jackson found his ticket money at the bottom of his shoe, and the bus roared off. Mrs. Watson held on to her red handbag. Mr. Parkinson clutched his shiny briefcase. Jackson sat on the back seat and bounced whenever the bus went over a bump. But all of a sudden, the bus lurched to a stop and the door flew open. A brown wallet tumbled out of Mr. Parkinson's shiny briefcase and flipped through the air. There was money all over the floor. A bunch of keys flew out of Mrs. Watson's red handbag. The keys sailed through the air and landed behind the back seat of the bus. The driver's glasses slipped right off his nose. Jackson bounced up and down on the back seat until he was dizzy. "Ugh!" screamed Mrs. Watson.
Stop!
Yelled Mr. Parkinson.
Yeehaw!
Cried Jackson.
Sorry about that, folks,
said the bus driver. As Mr. Parkinson ran to pick up his money, a gust of wind blew through the bus. All the banknotes went fluttering through the air.
My money!
Yelled Mr. Parkinson.
Help!
Stop fussing, said Mrs. Watson. There's no need to panic.
Excuse me,
said Jackson.
I have an idea.
Jackson took the lollipop from his pocket and gave it a lick. He held the lollipop high in the air and ran through the bus. One by one, all the banknotes stuck fast to the top of the lollipop. He handed the lollipop covered in banknotes to Mr. Parkinson.
You can keep the lollipop if you like,
said Jackson.
You never know when it might come in handy.
Well, thank you very much,
said Mr. Parkinson. Then Mrs. Watson pointed towards the back seat. My keys! She screamed. Help!
There's no need to panic,
said Mr. Parkinson.
Calm down.
Excuse me,
said Jackson, and took the red sock out of his pocket.
I have an idea.
Jackson dropped his magnet into the foot of the sock. He held the top of the sock and dangled it over the back seat. He let the sock down lower and lower until it touched the keys.
There,
said Jackson, and stood up. The keys were stuck fast to the end of the red sock. Jackson gave the keys to Mrs. Watson.
you can keep the sock if you like,
he said.
It might come in handy.
Oh, thank you very much, said Mrs. Watson.
Oh dear,
said the driver as he picked up his glasses. One arm had broken off completely. Jackson pulled the chewing gum from his pocket, gave it a chew, then used it to stick the glasses back together.
The gum is yours to keep,
said Jackson.
how handy.
Said the driver.
Thanks a lot. It's best to be prepared for anything, anytime, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, said Mrs. Watson, and she kissed Jackson on the cheek.
Most appreciated,
said Mr. Parkinson, and shook Jackson's hand.
Let's go,
cried the bus driver, and the bus roared off.
非常好的一个故事。